The most important part of your life was the time that you spent with these people. That's why all of you are here. Nobody does it alone, Jack.
Stories have become a huge part of how we see ourselves. Whether it's the belief that we could be superheroes to the belief that there is salvation at the other end of the sky, these stories give us inherent meaning and help us understand our place in the world. We often go back to stories time and time again to experience something new, to transport us away from a life full of mundane routine and bleak reality to a world full of obtainable desire and purpose. However, for some, these stories draw a fine line between fiction and reality. For others, the line between fiction and reality is blurred. These stories become a transcendental journey into life and the unknown. One such storyteller in television that makes use of blurring the lines is Damon Lindelof. He's primarily known for his sci-fi films and TV shows such as Prometheus, Lost, The Leftovers, and Watchmen. To cinephiles, Damon Lindelof is seen as a disappointment with his written works consisting of Prometheus and Cowboys vs. Aliens. His television career, however, is revered as his credits include writing on Lost and creating HBO's adaptation of The Leftovers and Watchmen. Each of these TV shows are all transcendental in their own right. They break the boundaries between fiction and reality and somehow gives us a sense of what it means to be human, on what the fundamental need of human nature is, and how people would realistically react to impossible adversities. Storytelling, especially within film and TV, makes use of conventions that are universally understood and utilized again and again. The hero's journey is prominent in both and even appears in advertisements. The yearning for a call to adventure and the invitation to our own journey helps us believe that we are fulfilling our own lives in the most meaningful way.
Do you remember the authentic Aboriginal walkabout?
Sure, that's all you've talked about for weeks.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna do it.
We are constantly bombarded by social media ads full of journeys into the unknown, as if we could ever find the everlasting, life-changing elixir. And if we don't answer the call to adventure, we acknowledge our lives to be without meaning. In Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces, he states that in comparison with all of this, our little stories of achievement seem pitiful. Too well we know what bitterness of failure, loss, disillusionment, and ironic unfulfillment galls the blood of even the envied of the world. As we face failure and loss, we go down a spiral of a sad world without meaning, without purpose. To bend this convention, television writers including Lindelof takes away the focus of the hero's journey to making the characters the core of the shows. This is not to say his shows are completely void of one, but this allows the show to be seen less as entertainment and more as fully fleshed people as they have multiple episodes to be developed. One good example in Lost is John Locke. His journey throughout 6 seasons shows his progression in a laid out manner. But Lindelof again doesn't make a point of that. He isn't just part of one hero's journey, he had a life of his own, a life full of dreams and failures. John Locke starts off as a character trying to find meaning. His life so far has been unfortunate, from growing up in an orphanage, his real dad seeks him out to take his kidney, and eventually becomes paraplegic. Human beings are driven by purpose, but how does one find purpose in all of that? Locke ultimately answers his call to adventure.
You know what you need, Mr. Locke? You need to go on a walkabout.
On the way to the walkabout, the plane crashes and he finds himself as one of the survivors, along with regaining the ability to walk. With this, Locke recognizes that he's in the midst of a journey and convinces himself that he was chosen for whatever purpose and that he was meant to be there.
Do you really think all this is an accident? That we, a group of strangers, survived? Many of us with just superficial injuries? You think we crashed on this place by coincidence? Especially this place? We were brought here for a purpose, for a reason, all of us. Each one of us was brought here for a reason.
This disillusionment overrides his self-awareness, which ultimately leads to his demise. Another convention that storytellers in film and TV adamantly repeat is the idea of show not tell. While this is a legitimate rule, it is one that is so prominent that once you notice it, it's not realistic. But with almost every master in a craft, they know how to bend or break these rules. In cinema, Quentin Tarantino crafts his dialogue in a way that shows by telling, as conversations and seemingly useless banter between his characters allow them to develop naturally and realistically. This allows the audience to learn about their characters through what they are saying and how they are saying it.
I refuse to believe you're gone.
You want some tea?
What?
I was gonna make a cup of tea. You want some?
Okay.
Lindelof does the same thing but goes more into it. In fact, he goes so far back to the roots of storytelling that the characters' backstories are spoken, similar to how we tell stories around a campfire. And with more regards to reflecting real life, one has to ask, how does Lindelof make his sci-fi shows seem more grounded and realistic? To continue living life after a plane crash with no hope of being rescued. To continue living life after 2% of the world's population disappears in an unexplainable event. And to continue living life in a world where it's normal for squids to fall from the sky. It's obvious that these ideas aren't meant to be real. What makes these shows amazing isn't the sci-fi undertones of these shows. It's that they're about grief, searching for answers, and different things that people end up doing in order to get through life. These themes make Lindelof shows that are supposed to be science fiction seem more realistic than dramas that are based upon reality. Lindelof shows raise the same questions that we try to answer as well. The Leftovers, bringing up the theme on what would happen to people without closure, and how exactly do people hold pieces of their lives together after collective trauma. What Lindelof does is he forces these questions that are on the back of our heads and puts them in front of the characters in a relatable way. How do we explain life's unexplainable mysteries? Religion often comes up and answers the question. It gives people the chance of salvation in a time where there is complete chaos. But what about the other end? What if God is dead?
Game over. He's dead. And where does God go when he dies?
Nietzsche answers the question stating, "New struggles. After Buddha was dead, they still showed his shadow in a cave for centuries. A colossal, horrible shadow. God is dead, but given the way people are, there may still be caves for millennia in which his shadow is displayed, and we must still defeat his shadow as well." Instead of answering questions, the Leftovers show a constant shadow of God, that people couldn't defeat the idea of the afterlife. Lindelof explores all of this with two family members having separate beliefs on the opposite side of the spectrum. On one end, we have Matt Jameson, a pastor who believes that the people that disappeared passed over. As the show goes on, he develops cancer and then confronts a man that refers to himself as God. But how do you talk to God, and how do you keep believing in a story that gives you salvation when you are faced with death?
Why?
Because there has to be a reason.
Why?
Everything in my life I've done for a reason.
Why?
To help people, to guide them, to ease their suffering, even though I suffered myself. I sacrificed my happiness. I let my family abandon me.
Why?
For you!
Everything you've done because you thought I was watching. Because you thought I was judging. But I wasn't. I'm not. You've never done anything for me. You did it for yourself.
Is that why you're killing me? When I was a boy, I was sick. And I prayed to you to save me, and you did. Why is it back?
I can save you again.
No, you can't.
This scene just isn't about a character that confronts God, it's a character that confronts his beliefs. On the other side of the family, his sister Nora Durst has her husband and kids disappear right behind her. She refuses to believe that they are just gone, but still everyone around her is moving on while she is still grieving. And Lindelof writes this grief in a way that is realistic and breaks any cliche that deals with moving on.
Sorry. Something that may never come back.
You lost someone?
I did.
You know, my daughter, about a year ago, she was out in our backyard chasing around some of her friends. And she was laughing. And she saw me watching her and she looked guilty. Like she wasn't sure if it was okay to be happy. But this, what we've experienced, it isn't grief. It's never ending. Ambiguous loss. If my 8-year-old could find happiness again, why can't the rest of us?
Bullshit.
I'm sorry.
No, you're not sorry. Sorry people don't write fucking books.
Wait a minute, ma'am. If I've offended you in any way, that was not my...
Ambiguous loss? What is ambiguous about your family being gone? Well, and you must know because you lost, what, 4? You count your parents in that? What were they, in their 70s? You sit there and tell me a story about your daughter. I lost everyone. I lost everything, you fucking fraud. You fucking liar. You're not in pain? Because if you were in pain, you would know there is no moving on. There is no happiness. What's next? What's fucking next? Nothing is next. Nothing.
Whether or not the man's word is true, what matters is the reaction we get from Nora's character and what it says about her at that point in time. Nora does not want to move on, that there is no cure for this grief, and that she's in denial that her family is gone. This scene also breaks the notion of the cliche with telling a story with a positive ending to a character in mourning, as if everything is going to be okay. Because in reality, nothing comes after. People just move on. This brings us to the last questions. Why do we believe these stories and why do we keep telling them? Stories could be escapism for people that live their lives in routine, where time has a set place for when a certain event begins and when it ends. If all of us are doomed to a life of constant routine, then where does one find the very purpose we seek? In Alan Watts' book, The Wisdom of Insecurity, he states somehow we must grab what we can while we can, and drown out the realization that the whole thing is futile and meaningless. We crave distraction, a panorama of sights, sounds, thrills, and titillations. We often come to adventure films because if we see characters find their purpose, then there's hope that we can too. But most often than not, in reality, no one ever decides to answer that call. No one ever chooses to find out who they really are. Lindelof shows that it's not the only way to find meaning through stories. His characters find their lives without any kind of structure that gives themselves purpose. Instead, the meaning doesn't come from the stories that they listen to, but the stories that they tell themselves. The memories that compose their identities and make them become who they really are. Their meaning comes from the stories that they choose to believe. None of his shows make any real sense, but does it have to? If real life in itself doesn't make sense, then why does a story have to? This method of storytelling lets go of structure in favor of pure creativity. Creativity to a way where we could be responsible to make our own stories and be our own creators. Instead of dwelling on who we aspire to become, we can be free from any boundaries and identities we put on ourselves to maintain structure. Lindelof's way of storytelling shows that in reality, the absurd is never solved by comforting solutions and conclusions that are traditionally delivered. Instead, his shows portray that you fundamentally have to decide for yourself what you believe in, and deal with the meaningless of life however you can. That in order to find meaning, we must live and create it. Only then will we find our story to tell.